Greetings, this is Bradford Donald Keller Townsend, and this is a Forward Research Report quick video. And I'd like to just give a brief primer on human population. In 10,000 BC, 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age when the glaciers began to rapidly retreat, the human population was 7.5 billion human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens. The current metro area of Chicago is about 10,400,000. So it was less than the U.S. Midwest Great Lakes city, one of the world's major cities for industry and commerce, Chicago. Then in the time of Jesus Christ, when the Western Roman Empire was approximately at its zenith 2,000 years ago, the human population across the globe was approximately 175 million. And then if you go to the time of European colonization of the Americas, the population had grown to about 700 million. Then in about 1960, with the advent of fertilizers and tractors for agriculture, the mechanization, using natural gas for nitrous fertilizers, hand washing and hygiene, sewer systems, clean water. That is what got the population up from under 1 billion when the U.S. Constitution was passed in 1789 to the 3 billion in 1960. Then, according to the human clock that you can Google, it's over 7 billion 300 million estimated at this time. So when you look at resource depletion, and the human population is growing rapidly, especially in the poorest countries such as Afghanistan and the Congo, rural Honduras and places like that that still don't have family planning, where you may have agriculture where it's manual agriculture, and having children can be of some benefit as a free source of labor. It's a net gain, having them be able to weed the field and plant the field, and if you have to carry water from a well. Now, 19% of the world's population uses 80% of the world's resources. The United States, with only 4% of the world's resources, uses a little over 30%. I mean, 4% of the population uses 30% of the world's resources plus. And this is unsustainable. Resource depletion has happened. The fisheries off of Newfoundland and Boston and that area was a massive industry employing tens of thousands of people providing fish. They overfished those fisheries in the North Atlantic. The United States was a major exporter of petroleum, funded the Allies. Our petroleum was undisturbed by bombing and our massive shipping capabilities. We supplied all of our allies, the British, the French, the Russians, the Dutch, with oil so that they could help fight the Japanese and German allies, them and their allies. So, we've depleted. If you look at the oil production in a graph of Alaska, you can see that it has declined substantially. Oil can be depleted. Pennsylvania is where oil was originally found, and there's very little oil taken out of the Pennsylvania area of the country. So we have many, if not all, of the natural resources being rapidly depleted, and the resources are not they're not of the same quality. The anthracite coal for centuries that was mined had a much higher energy density and was less polluting than the coal. So they go after the easiest to get, best resources first. If you look at the oil of Iraq, Syria, Iran, it's much higher quality, more energy dense, much easier to refine than the oil of Venezuela, which now has the largest proven reserves, and the tar sands of Canada. The tar sands of Canada only have a 4-to-1 ratio. It takes like the equivalent of 1 barrel of energy of petroleum to get out 4. When it began in Pennsylvania, it was over 100 barrels out for 1 barrel of energy put in. It's the same with offshore oil, those giant rigs off the Gulf of Mexico or Norway or Scotland. They only have about a 4-to-1 energy return for energy invested. Coal is getting a much lower energy return for energy invested, as the coal is of a lower quality. If you look at base metals such as copper, which is obviously needed to build out power grids and make electric motors for everything that's electric, such as your refrigerator or dishwasher, the only getting specks of coal, in a kilo of the ore or ground that they're mining, when they used to get nuggets 150 years ago. So the return of the minerals for the amount of energy that you put in is declining. And something I've never heard of that I think about, having been a former construction superintendent, is cement. Cement uses magnesium, which is supposed to have hit its peak in the 1960s, as far as we mined out half of the world's magnesium, which goes into cement, which then is the component, mixed with aggregates to make concrete. And the typical building is government buildings, schools, hospitals, libraries, is made out of reinforced concrete using steel rebar, which is subject to oxidation and rusting, and then expands and cracks. So if you have a minor earthquake, causes a little crack, the crack seeps in water, and then the rusting begins, and then it expands. So the life expectancy with some maintenance of a steel reinforced concrete building is 40 years. With extensive maintenance and major repairs, it's only 70 years. So almost all the world's infrastructure is starting to decay and crumble. I could go around my local area and find crumbling buildings all over, bridges and all types of infrastructure. And if India, which is currently planning 200 coal-fired plants, a large number of natural gas plants, nuclear plants, Africa still has a large percentage of its population without water, sewage, electricity. Think of all the power line towers, all the aluminum, all the iron ore, and other tin, copper that would be needed to electrify Africa and meet its rapidly growing population needs, which is now past the 1 billion human mark. So it looks like within 5-6 years, a half a dozen of the rare earth metals, or I guess rarer base metals, will probably slow the growth of things like cell phones, solar panels, the internet in general, as the components to replace the servers and laptops and cell phones are not available. They're already running into constraints on lithium and cobalt. We're going to probably see further, degradation of our fisheries and forests as those are used. And this whole industrial global civilization is unsustainable. It is running into constraints already. And this is why, we're just probably going to see more trouble and conflict. I think 1 to maybe 1.5 billion is probably the maximum sustainable population on the earth, as these natural resources are depleted and there's no replacement for them on a massive scale. Obviously, that means with that 6 billion people plus may, by the time it really hits, have to be drawn down to get down to sustainable organic farming. And probably 40% of the survivors will have to be full-time year-round farmers. Then you have climate change as we head into a mini ice age, possibly the next ice age, due to the sun going into a long minimum period, which will shift where the agriculture productivity will change. So I would stay positive. I think the new agricultural based economy that we're going to be transitioning into, without people walking around staring at their cell phones, and people working in the fields together, and communities becoming more localized, both in the power, because there won't be the energy for the central governments to project their power into the villages and towns, and people will play acoustic instruments together, form choirs. We'll still have knowledge of chemistry and physics and mechanics. That's the part of physics that has to do with like the bridges or electric and internal combustion motors, the principles that power those. So we'll have knowledge accumulated from that boom centuries of the fossil fuel area. Almost every natural resource is supposed to be depleted by the year 2070, and they'll just gradually hit different ones until only a handful, like aluminum, are still relatively abundant. But the return on energy, invested energy return for every, or the, maybe not energy return, but the value of what is returned will make more and more of industrial civilization impractical, and we'll have to set priorities, and there'll probably be resource wars over how to distribute the last of our raw materials. Thank you very much. Think positive. I would plan for your future with these unpleasant facts in mind. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.